Hello and welcome to Film Rant. Today, 21st of October 2015, marks the day Marty McFly travelled to the future and Back to the Future Part 2, so naturally everywhere is celebrating it as Back to the Future Day. In honour of this amazing trilogy of movies, I've decided to do a video on it, simply just talking about it. It's not a review as such, just a tribute to Robert Zemeckis' masterpiece Back to the Future. It's probably pointless making this, as I bet there's thousands of Back to the Future videos out there, but I figure my subs might appreciate the video, and if you're watching from the unsubscribed area, then come in, take a seat, and let's all masturbate to Back to the Future. Verbally, I mean. So as usual, we'll start with the characters and look at the main man, Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox. Marty is simply one of the best lead characters in movie history. He's funny, he's relatable, and he's very entertaining to watch. Even his name sounds fun. Marty McFly. It just rolls off the tongue nicely and is incredibly memorable. Michael J. Fox also delivers most of his lines absolutely perfectly, so much so that he made 90% of the trilogy infinitely quotable.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
If we ever wanted to have a character we remember for time travel, Marty McFly is the man. Doctor Who's got nothing on this twat. Dr. Emmett Brown is everyone's favourite mad scientist, clearly based on Einstein, which his dog is also named. We can't help but fall in love with his wild mishaps and eccentric personality. He's the perfect sidekick for Marty. Marty seems very level-headed, young, cool and fairly calm. Doc is meant to subvert all that, which makes them the perfect pairing. Doc is crazy, old and totally erratic. Like Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd totally nails his character. In fact, a personal favourite line from the series is in the first movie.
Then tell me, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor? Then who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
Absolutely fantastic. Apparently, when Reagan saw Back to the Future in the cinema, he thought that line was so funny, he asked the guys to rewind the tape so he could watch it again. Yeah, the writers can come up with all the jokes, but Lloyd delivers them brilliantly. Lloyd has some fantastic horrified reactions too, always utilising the phrase,
Great Scott!
Doc is a perfect secondary character. He's backup for Marty and a well-rounded character. There might even be some of you who favour the Doc over Marty, and I can't really blame you. But we can't do a Back to the Future video without talking about Biff Tannen, the villain of the series, played by Thomas F. Wilson, who also plays the gym teacher in Freaks and Geeks. Yeah, that was a very shameless plug for that show. Watch it, it's awesome. I love Biff, all 4 iterations of him. Obviously I love him in a I hate that guy kind of way, but he's an entertaining villain and some of the dumb comments he makes are priceless.
Thank you very much. Now why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
It's leave, you idiot. Make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong.
Like the Doc and Marty, he also makes most of the movie quotable.
So what are you looking at, butthead?
Biff's motivation is to simply be better than the McFlys. It's a very high school ambition, and it begins in high school as we see in the first movie. Biff just can't grow up. Seeing him interact with old Biff is hilarious. He's even rude to his older self. Biff Tannen is an ideal Western villain too, the ruthless outlaw who ruins people's lives. You can imagine that Biff would have an ancestor like that, and Thomas F. Wilson acts it brilliantly. Wilson actually has to play 4, I think, versions of himself, and he does them all flawlessly. It's a shame these actors got typecast, as they're all terrific. Thomas F. Wilson also came up with this song so that he doesn't have to answer any more questions about Back to the Future.
When I'm flying in a plane or I'm on the street, there's a lot of friendly people that I like to meet. They shake my hand but never ask my name, and they start asking questions that are always the same. Hey, what's Michael J. Fox like? He's nice. What's Christopher Lloyd like? Kinda quiet. What's Crispin Glover like? Unusual. Stop asking me the question.
Genius. Now we'll get on to the script. I could talk forever about the script of all 3 movies, but I'm going to paraphrase for the purposes of time. Firstly, the comedy in the trilogy is second to none. It's not your typical kind of jokes either. A lot of it is in the actor's delivery.
Hey, just tell me one thing. Where did you learn to shoot like that?
7-Eleven.
It also has a nice selection of time travel specific comedy. My absolute favourite line from the whole trilogy is when Marty meets his Uncle Joey as a baby, who eventually ends up in prison. Marty sees Joey in his crib and says, "So you're my Uncle Joey? Better get used to these bars, kid." I love that style of comedy, and obviously it only works in time travel movies. In a similar vein, there's the whole story with Marty's mom having the hots for him. It's a bit weird, but ultimately it's very funny. What Back to the Future does so well though is mix in the comedy with a perfectly flowing and dramatic story. It chooses when and where to place its comedic moments, and none of them feel out of place. After all, Back to the Future is meant to be a light-hearted family movie. One of the major contributions to Back to the Future's success is how well it handles time travel. There's lots going on in the trilogy. Marty goes back to the 50s, then returns to a slightly alternate timeline in which Biff is his family's servant, then goes into the future where there are two Martys and returns again to another alternate timeline where Biff is a crime lord. He then returns back to the 50s to take the sports almanac from Biff, and finally, Marty ends up travelling to the Wild West to save the Doc. That's an awful lot of time jumping, yet Back to the Future explains everything so simply a 6-year-old could keep up, especially given Doc likes to draw a visual representation of the timelines, a format which movies have since copied. Zemeckis and the writers did a great job explaining and visually showing the complex time travel ideas they came up with. Obviously, Back to the Future is a thoroughly entertaining trilogy. I never found myself getting bored in any of the three. Biff is a very entertaining villain, Marty and the Doc make such a strong leading duo, and the story itself was fairly new territory for the time it came out. Yeah, there had been time travel before, with Doctor Who making its debut in '63 and The Terminator coming out in '84. Both of those are mainstream successes. The first iteration of time travel in a movie was in 1921 in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Emmett J. Flynn. The original Terminator movie had time travel via Kyle Reese travelling to the past to save Sarah Connor, while the Terminator also travels back to kill her. For Back to the Future, the success of the Terminator was a big help. People rushed to see the James Cameron classic, and it allowed audiences to accept time travel on a massive scale. Marty's story in comparison is much lighter, but still features a heavy amount of time travel. It's the way Back to the Future handles time travel that makes it very unique. Instead of magically coming back in time via a portal, it features a time machine in the form of a car. It's also made by a random scientist in his house, not some massive government or villainous project. Marty and Doc are meant to be time adventurers, but it's the issues that arise from those adventures that form the crux of the movie, and also form the moral that maybe we shouldn't mess with time travel because, you know, it fucks everything up. Now, we can't do a video on Back to the Future without talking about that Johnny Be Good scene. It's just absolute gold. When you watch the movie for the first time, it's just so unexpected. We know fine well Marty can play guitar as we see him with his band the Pinheads, but we don't expect to see him put on a full performance of a classic song at the end. What really sells it is how well Michael J. Fox performs it. Instead of him miming someone else, he belts out his own vocal rendition of it, which is fantastic, and his face-melting guitar solo at the end is even better. This again all feeds into the comedic side of the movie, with the line,
Chuck, it's Marvin! Your cousin, Marvin Berry! You know that new sound you looking for? Well, listen to this!
and
I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna...
So in this universe, Marty McFly invented the song Johnny Be Good. Fantastic. Every time I watch this movie, I just watch it in excitement to get to this scene. It's just perfect. I like that each movie in the trilogy reuses the same scenes, but changes them slightly to accommodate the time period. We have the scene where Marty walks into a bar and gets confronted by Biff. Biff is also spouting out, "Hey McFly!" as he walks into Marty's dad, son, or in the final movie, Marty himself, mistaken to be his ancestor, Seamus McFly. Then in the first two movies follows a chase between Biff and Marty with the use of a skateboard or hoverboard. Then at some point in the movies there's Biff crashing into a manure truck and saying his famous line, "I hate manure." This running gag is done a little differently in the third movie as Marty punches Biff into a cart of manure. Often in movies it's poor taste to recycle old scenes, but Back to the Future changes them per timeline so effectively that it plays for laughs. It also helps make some of the lines from the scenes and the scenes themselves iconic. Sometimes it's even shot for shot too, like in the first two movies it highlights Marty's small stature compared to Biff. It takes brilliant direction and writing to pull off this copy and paste style of filmmaking, and Zemeckis did it perfectly. There's a lot more reused imagery and motifs in the trilogy, but I'll let you find them for yourself.
Something very familiar about all this.
Back to the Future also houses some lovely little subtleties. No doubt you've seen numerous articles on BuzzFeed or Cracked about them. For example, how Twin Pines Mall changes to Lone Pine Mall at the end of part 1 because Marty ran down one of the pines in the DeLorean when he escaped from the Peabody household in 1955. There's also foreshadowing in the opening credits as the camera pans past a lot of clocks. One of the clocks has Harold Lloyd hanging from it, which is mirroring the end where Christopher Lloyd, the Doc, is hanging from the clock tower. On that clock tower, the Doc breaks off a piece of the ledge. When Marty and Jennifer are sitting in 1985 and the lady asks them to save the clock tower, in the background the ledge is perfectly intact. But in the versions of 1985 where Marty had travelled to 1955, the ledge is broken. Zemeckis clearly paid a lot of attention to detail, and there's not many continuity errors, which is remarkable for a trilogy about time travel. Zemeckis made this movie the cinema icon that it is with such dedication like that. So, since it's the 21st of October 2015, let's have a look at how much Back to the Future 2 got right. So here's what we don't have. Hoverboards quite as good as the ones in the movie, but they do exist. Cars that look like that, or hover cars in general. Jaws 19 isn't out, thank God, but they are putting together a trailer for that, I believe. Unfortunately, curse Satan, we don't have instant hydratable pizzas courtesy of Pizza Hut and Black & Decker. Yous need to get on that shit, guys, come on. Automatic shoelaces are auto-fitting clothes, though apparently Nike have developed a set of the sneakers Marty wears in part 2 that also have auto shoelaces, so maybe we aren't too far off them. And here's what we do have. Multi-screen TVs, sort of. Keyless security, or at least in workplaces. VR headsets, voice control, and terrible Hollywood continuations or reboots. I've probably missed some things, so add them in the comments below. But one major thing Back to the Future didn't predict was the reliance on mobile phones and the invention of the internet. I wonder how this would have looked if Zemeckis and the writers had predicted the internet. The world we currently live in isn't a whole while away from that depicted in part 2. Maybe by 2025 or 2030 everything in this movie will be available. It's funny really, even though it's showing the future exactly how somebody in the 80s would see it. Even though it's meant to be futuristic, the technology still kinda looks ancient. It's actually very charming. On that note though, we'll take a look at the technical side of the movie. I think for the time it was made, the VFX hold up very well. Yeah, through the years they've had a bit of a facelift with each re-release, but still. The flying DeLorean looks pretty solid, as does the air traffic in part 2. The holographic projection doesn't look too bad, and neither does Mayor Wilson's advertising campaign. I'm mostly picking parts here from part 2, as part 1 and 3 don't utilise that many visual effects, if any at all. The most iconic effect is probably the time travel effect, where the sparks fly around the car and it leaves a fire trail behind. In some scenes the fire is real and in others it's added in. This one is obviously added in as Marty's foot is standing in the fire. But yeah, Back to the Future's visual effects are great for the time it was made, and it still mostly holds up today. The soundtrack for Back to the Future is just as memorable as the movies themselves, from the main orchestral theme to the hits Back in Time and The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News. Both Huey Lewis songs are utilised brilliantly in the movies, and the orchestral theme is as iconic as Star Wars or Harry Potter. It's not very often these days you find a great orchestral theme tune. I think films need more of them. Every time I think of Back to the Future I hum the theme tune, and I'm sure many of you do too, which shows just how great the soundtrack is for this trilogy.
What do you mean we're in the future?
October 21st, 2015.
The costume and set design in all the movies is fantastic. Marty's outfit again is incredibly iconic. Who the hell wears an orange puffer jacket with white shirt and double denim? Never go double denim, especially with the addition of a life preserver. Doc typically looks like a mad scientist with his white coat. Biff's dress sense is typical of a normal guy in the time period. The costumes they wear in the West are reminiscent of old Western movies, with the exception of Marty, who actually looks like he bought the outfit from a costume store, and that's commented on by Biff Tannen in the final movie. Well done to the team though for part 2, where they had to make things look futuristic. As I've said, now that it's 2015 you can tell it was an idea conceived in the 80s, as the tech still looks fairly 80s-ish to us. I'm not an 80s kid, so I can't be sure on this, but I think at the time the movie was released this probably looked quite futuristic to audiences. So yeah, top-notch set design and costume design. So finally I will round up by saying that in my book, Back to the Future is simply the best film trilogy ever made, and probably always will be. I grew up watching it, as it's also my dad's favourite trilogy, and pretty much everyone I've ever met is a fan of it, if they've seen it. Though I understand there'll be some of you out there who don't like it, and that's fine. Usually it's like jumping on a bandwagon to like a film as popular as this, but in Back to the Future's case it really isn't. It's just simply that good. It appeals to pretty much everyone. It's brilliantly directed, acted even better, and contains possibly the best story and comedy I've ever seen. In fact, I actually can't think of a single thing to criticise about Back to the Future. Maybe I'm blinded by my love for it, but there's honestly nothing I don't like about any of the 3 movies. It's poetic really. A trilogy about time travel has actually become timeless itself. Happy Back to the Future Day everybody. Now I'm off to the cinema to watch all 3 back to back. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.